Al-Etejah News Channel. The truth fears no questions.
Hello and welcome, dear viewers. This is Cases. The Partnership for Civil Justice Fund in the United States, known as PCJF, has released new documents that show how Department of Homeland Security, DHS, routinely spies on peaceful First Amendment activities and requires daily briefing on the extent of media attention being given specifically to Occupy Wall Street activities. The new document released by PCJF also showed that DHS was interested in the Occupy movement's ability to gain momentum through social media. Such act opened the door to the rights and flexibilities given to protesters in the United States. Is this spying network part of secretive laws amendments signed by Obama as the HR House Resolution 347 that was signed in 2012? This bill that limited the basic rights given to American citizens when it comes to the right to assemble, protest and demonstrate? Is in the US a signatory of most conventions that speaks about rights to freedom of speech? This will be our case for today. I'm joined here by Dr. Hussein, Gharbiye, a professor of political science at the Lebanese University, and joining us also from Maryland, Mr. Navid Nasr. He is a broadcaster with Voices of the 99% Radio. Hello and welcome to Cases, gentlemen. Of course, we will take a report that would give us more perspective of the House Resolution 347 and various topics that we highlighted in the introduction. We will take a look, dear viewers, and be right back.
Imagine a United States in which protesting is denied in any public space the police deems fit, where wearing a descending shirt around an elected official would be considered a felony. The United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights recently released a report on ensuring the right to peaceful protest that maintains that peaceful protests are a fundamental aspect of a vibrant democracy. Accordingly, states should recognize the positive role of peaceful protests as a means to strengthen human rights and democracy. They should guarantee the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of opinion and expression, which are essential components of democracy and indispensable to the full enjoyment of all human rights. Last year, the Congress passed the Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds Improvement Act, known as HR 347, a bill that jurists say it might limit Americans' ability to protest in public and on government grounds. The bill was also regarded by the American author and political consultant Naomi Wolf as a rollback to point before the signing of the Magna Carta. HR 347 is an amendment to an existing law, Restricted Buildings and Grounds, that has existed in various forms since 1971. The most significant amendments to the law occurred in 2006 and most recently in 2012. The executive director of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, Mara Verheiden-Hillard, reported that the law before the last amendment required for a person to be prosecuted when the described acts were carried out both willfully and knowingly. The requirement of willfulness generally means that a conviction requires proof that the person knew his conduct was unlawful. However, HR 347 sheds the willfully requirement. The new amendments are aimed at persons to be convicted only by knowingly carrying out the described actions, even if the person is unaware that the actions are unlawful. The other major change is the inclusion of the White House grounds and the Vice President's residence as fixed zones of designation. Verheide and Hillard believe this particular change is designed to target demonstration activity, specifically which occurs on the White House sidewalk just outside the perimeter fence. She maintains that the government wishes to make it easier to prosecute protesters who approach the perimeter of the White House. Verheide and Hillard is concerned that the Secret Service is attempting to expand its jurisdiction and authority to create pop-up cordoned-off restriction zones in front of the White House, extending to areas where demonstrations lawfully assemble.
Okay, Dr. Hussein, obviously the report highlighted several points that we can tackle in today's episode in cases. But here the main question is asked today, as in how do you evaluate, from your perspective, Doctor, this change in laws concerning, or amendments in laws concerning the freedom of protesting or the right of protesters in the US since 1971 specifically until today, 2013, especially after Obama's inauguration?
Well, definitely. When you have this evolution of laws since 70s until today, or 2012, regarding the freedom of speech, it's something related directly to the imperial power of the United States. Once this power expands more and more, it means it gathers a lot of enemies and a lot of protesters against the foreign policy. This foreign policy is costing the U.S. A huge amount of money, billions and trillions of dollars, which affecting the internal life, the economic life of the American people. The protesters usually, who are they? Are they the immigrants from other parts of the world to the United States, or mainly the real Americans, or the native American citizens mainly? So this bill is directed to the American people themselves. Now, whether they succeed and this bill lasts for a longer period of time, it depends on the movements of the people and the civil society and the associations regarding human rights. They will change, or they will stop the continuation of such policy where freedom of speech is the real factor, or the major factor of democracy. And as the US is the largest democratic country in the world, so such laws will undermine the democratic principles of this country, and will in fact...
So do you disagree here, Doctor, that the certain amendments are required with the coming of the years, or probably with different presidents being in the White House? Don't you agree here that certain amendments should be done to the Constitution, or do you believe that it's a sacred Constitution that shouldn't be touched and shouldn't be, because when the rules were kept and the articles were kept, they were kept with high persistence? Does that mean that they're not changeable here, if we can say?
No, the constitutions are made, especially in the democratic world, the secular democratic world.
Yes.
This constitution is made by people, so people can amend, can change the constitution in order to fit their needs. Constitution is usually meet the needs of the people. This is the real value of the constitution. Okay, now.
And it's always supposed to be that way in order to serve the needs of the people.
Definitely, definitely. Now, people chose freedom of speech. They want to protect themselves, because political system, presidents, senates, all of them are elected by people. In democratic countries, we have something called accountability.
Yes.
Those in power are accountable to people. Now, if you want to take this accountability rights from people, then you are turning the country into non-democratic country, slowly but surely.
Exactly.
Now, but as you've seen from the report here, people in the United States, they will face the decision makers in the United States to stop them from continuing such illegal act, in my opinion.
Yes.
Because democracy is based on freedom of speech.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if you...
Yes. Okay, here a question goes to Mr. Navid. Mr. Navid, the United States Law Enforcement Agency, from the FBI to actually local police, have a long history of spying on American citizens as they continue to monitor and harass groups and individuals for peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights. How does the law view such an act that is done by the FBI and certain officials within the White House?
How does the law view what the FBI and the DHS have done with regards to spying on the Occupy movement? It's a difficult question to answer because the law is pretty much whatever people who hold the reins of power say it is. In other words, the Constitution can say something, the Bill of Rights can say something, and along comes a bill that changes everything. But even if there was no H.R. 347, I'm positive we would be seeing some sort of spying.
Yes, but you're saying that there isn't certain kind of a high Supreme Court within the U.S. that can actually judge these officials for actually conducting such acts on the ground?
There is, sure there is. There would have to be a groundswell of public support in order to make that happen. We haven't really seen that. At least I haven't seen that sort of thing. And they really have attempted to do it and do everything in a legal way. In other words, H.R. 347, as odious as it might be, as horrible as it might be on civil liberties grounds, was passed through in a legal way. And I might add, it was passed through with almost unanimity by elected officials, by national elected officials. All the senators, every single one of the senators signed off on it, agreed to it, and there were only 3 dissenting votes in Congress, in the House of Representatives, and that was Ron Paul and 2 other Republican congressmen. Every single Democrat, and we tend to think of, at least in the U.S., we tend to think of the Democrats as being more on the side of the people, being more on the side of civil liberties. Every single Democrat voted for H.R. 347.
Actually, Navid, before speaking about the content of the H.R. 347 here, the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund in the United States, known as PCJF, has shed the light recently on some violations also made by the U.S. government or even Department of Homeland Security specifically, if we can specify, as they are spying on protesters of the Occupy Wall Street. Do you believe that this step here will open the door for more varieties or even for more freedom of expression that is not given to the U.S. citizens here, U.S. citizen here?
You mean them releasing these documents? It's possible. I mean, I don't know if it'll give us more freedom, but at least it'll alert us to what the Department of Homeland Security has done. You're right. On their website, they have the documents. They did the what they call FOIA, which is basically just you request information. They released this information on their website. It's very useful for those of us particularly who were involved in the Occupy movement. It's very useful to see what the Department of Homeland Security was concerned about, why they were targeting us, where they were targeting us. I mean, it wasn't just I was involved in Occupy D.C. Yes. I know that D.C. and New York were heavily observed and spied upon by Homeland Security, but I mean, cities that you wouldn't think, Asheville, North Carolina, Tampa, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville.
Okay, but Mr. Navid, will this story here actually grasp certain kind of attention from social media, from the press, from journalists towards certain kind of violations happening inside the U.S. when it comes to freedom of expression here? Does it bring back the light to the amendments that happened to H.R. 347, to certain kind of restrictions that were kept in front of these demonstrators at least? Will it bring back the attention that has been not for so far? In 2012 the amendment happened. Will that give it back to life, bring it back to life?
I certainly hope so. I guess it's up to us, really, the people who were involved with the Occupy movement in the first place, and to you all, to international media. It's not going to be, I really don't think that national U.S. media will focus too much on this. Maybe international media will, and it's certainly, again, up to us, those of us in the Occupy movement who produce our own media, who put our own message, our own narrative out there, to put this out there as much as possible and to talk about it, to talk about what the Department of Homeland Security did, what the FBI did, what H.R. 347 is, why it should concern all of us, and what we can do to fight back against all of this. Yeah.
Yes. Dr. Hussein, here President Barack Obama repeatedly clarified, if you can say, that the U.S. Constitution is out of date and that it's hindering governing the country, in other words. That's why he is ripping it up and writing a new one from his own perspective. Now, one of the amendments made related to our topic is what we started from the beginning, H.R. 347, House Resolution 347, that limits the rights of protesters. Here, under what law does the President have rights or legal rights in order to change a whole constitution and write certain amendments to whatever article in the Bill of Rights?
No, it's only a bill. This bill, it means it has to be presented to the Senate, and the Senate will vote. So he doesn't have the right. He has the right to produce a bill. That's it. This is the only right he has.
Yes.
But if he claims, Obama...
And it's up to the senators.
Exactly. If Obama claims that the American Constitution is out of date, it means maybe they will go back to the slavery then. Democracy that brought Obama to become the president.
Exactly.
He shouldn't forget that they were
because of the Constitution, it was paved the way for him to be a president.
Exactly. So when American black Americans who fought to get their own rights, the same as the white people, they depended on the democracy and the Constitution to get this right. And now, if he wants to turn the table upside down, it means he might go back to the slavery the way he was before, the black American.
Yes.
And it's very dangerous. It's a dangerous play to do or to play. So they should be very careful. The only right, as I said, he has the right to present a bill to the Senate, and the Senate will vote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Navid, here the original law that was enacted in 1971 and amended in 2006 says a federal offense to willfully and knowingly enter a restricted space to protest. As journalists, have you detected certain kind of deficiency in this particular article before the amendment that took place?
Well, what happened in 2006 when the bill was expanded was the definition of restricted space expanded. Yes. That's key here. What we're talking about, for example, is any place where Secret Service people, Secret Service bodyguards is a restricted space. And that's not just where the president is. Any place where visiting dignitaries are, there's going to be Secret Service. Any place where people running for national office are, there's going to be Secret Service. At the Democratic and Republican national conventions,
yes,
the Secret Service is there. These are the places where we traditionally go to protest, at these places. So the fact that if we step on a particular sidewalk or a particular invisible boundary means that we're committing a felony is a chilling effect. I mean, a felony is not something to be taken lightly in the U.S.
Yes.
Felony stays on your record, depending on what state you're talking about. It can stay on your record forever, a felony. It affects things like employment opportunities. It stays on your, when people do a search for you, that comes up, that you are a convicted felon. And it doesn't matter what the background of it was. Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yes, what the reasons were. Okay, here, from your perspective also as a journalist, Mr. Navid, do you believe that actually this law, it should have been left as it was, because there is no much of deficiencies in it as we can actually highlight? Do you think it wasn't supposed to be amended into H.R. 347 from the start, because it was a clear and vivid and an article that actually served the U.S. citizens?
I mean, from my perspective, I'm opposed to the law, period, whether it was amended or not. And I just stand opposed to the law. But the fact that the law was amended, I mean, has nothing to do with us, has nothing to do with U.S. citizens.
Yes.
It has to do with the U.S. state and the U.S., the dominant class of the U.S. being fearful of any sort of opposition to it. Really, I mean, the U.S., there's a lot of other states who proclaim the mantle of democracy and freedom. The fact is, no matter where you go in the world, no matter what country, no matter what state you are in, if you are doing or saying something that puts that state, that government in fear, that actually causes it to fear for itself, you will, in some way, that state, that government will target you.
Okay.
In some way. In some states, you might be disappeared. In other states, they might find some excuse to arrest you.
Of course, you will be speaking more how that will actually affect the rights to demonstrate within the U.S. Dear viewers, we got more to speak about. Stay with us.
Time. Variable. Event. The only constant variable in life is change. Broader perspective. Arguments and counter-arguments on our platform.
Global Insights. The Globe on our platform.
Welcome back, dear viewers. The HR 347 defined restricted buildings or grounds as the White House or its ground, or the Vice President's official residence or its area. A building or grounds where the President or other person protected by the Secret Service is or will be temporarily visiting. A building or ground so restricted due to a special event of national significance. Of course, now we gave a clear image of what 347 is, and here if we can highlight the content more of what it includes, Doctor. Now prosecutors can be convicted when only showing that they did it knowingly. They did the protesting knowingly, and that they knew that the area was restricted, even if they didn't know it was illegal to enter the space. As in, the word willfully is taken out, and that's what was amended in the HR 347. Does that mean that the demonstrators can be arrested and without even knowing why they were arrested?
Definitely. The term of the bill is very broad.
Yes.
To the extent that it gave the discretion to the authorities to decide when and when not to arrest a particular person.
Yes.
And it was left in a broad sense in order to give themselves the right to maneuver more and more, to gain more control on the situation. People might not know even there's an official Secret Service official in the area or in the restaurant or in the building, and if they took it to themselves about an issue regarding the policy in the United States, and which doesn't disagree with the policy of the decision makers, he might get arrested or she might get arrested. So the vagueness of the bill itself is quite dangerous, and this is what makes it bewildering to the Americans and to the journalists and to the people, to the public. So they don't know exactly when to demonstrate, when to raise their voice, where to gather.
Yes.
And this is against the original right by democratic countries, which is the freedom of speech, assembly, and picketing or petitions, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Mr. Navid, here, of course, explaining about the content of HR 347, we highlighted with Dr. Hussein that under the slogan that the demonstrators will be knowingly and not willfully, and that's how they will be arrested. But while HR 347 came to actually take out the word willfully, and of course, the word willfully here represents that the demonstrators know exactly what's going on and are aware of the rights and aware of the legal perspective, but still want to demonstrate. Here, the HR 347 took that out completely. And here I asked, does that mean that when these demonstrators are arrested, they won't even know at the first place why are they arrested?
I think so. I think that is what it means. Yeah, the removal of languages in these bills is very important. And there's a reason why the languages in all of these bills is very specific. And you're right, the removal of the original language, which was willfully and knowingly, into just knowingly entering a restricted area, is huge. The other thing that is huge about 347, which was not a part of the amendment in 2006 or the original bill in 1971, is that now the bill includes Washington, D.C. itself.
Yes.
Before, D.C. was covered with regards to a restricted area only by local laws. Now it's a federal law. And this changes everything. It's already confusing enough, believe me, living in this area, protesting in D.C., it's already confusing enough because for those who aren't aware, Washington, D.C. is a city that has more varied and different police departments than any city I can think of. There's at least like 15, 16, or 17 different police law enforcement entities operating in this city.
Okay, Mr. Navid, excuse me, there is a thing that actually caught my attention personally here. Throughout the conversations that we've actually watched, speaking about the HR 347 since 2012 up till now, we've seen people conducting and dealing with the matter as in the fact that knowingly, using the verb knowingly, and they weren't even discussing the verb as a terminology, but they were even discussing what comes after the word knowingly, as in where to actually demonstrate, how to demonstrate, what are the areas, and under what security, under what provisions, not paying much attention that there is some kind of confusion going on. They were discussing further material, which is also important, I do agree, but at the same time, the word knowingly did not trick them, as in not more of attention is paid to the word willfully, that is much of attention should be given to it on the other hand, because that's the main target and the main aspect here we're dealing with.
Well, yes, the removal of the word willfully definitely changes in terms of like what it does in terms of like protesters. It plants a seed of doubt in you.
Yes.
You don't exactly know where the line is in terms of sometimes you want to, for the sake of a protest, you want at least some people to knowingly break the law,
yes.
right? And some people, you know, willingly get arrested, right? But you don't necessarily want everyone to do that. You know, you don't want everyone at a protest. I mean, not everyone even wants to get arrested when they go to a protest, and
exactly.
it does send a chilling effect to those people who want to partake in a protest but don't want to get arrested. If they go, like, say, in front of the White House or something, they don't know like where. They don't know exactly what the law is with regards to where they can set their foot on and where not. You know, they don't know, and because of that, because there's that possibility. Even if you don't know, of getting arrested and being charged with a felony, a lot of people are going to stay home.
Exactly. Here, Mr. Navid, what's the real aim behind using such terminology, such vague, extremely vague terminologies in dealing with the Constitution here or in dealing with the Bill of Rights? Is this a kind of a new way of actually targeting certain articles within the Bill of Rights, as in to mislead the people here? Because, of course, in order to like understand what this content is about, I need a lawyer. I need someone next to me to actually define these terminologies. Right. Is this a new step or a new way of dealing, a new policy done by the U.S. and dealing with the words written within the Constitution?
Well, again, I think the purpose of this is exactly what I talked about, which is the chilling effect.
Yes.
In other words, preventing people, not preventing, but
misleading,
causing
if you can
fear
say.
in people and making people fearful of going out to these demonstrations and these protests because they don't know what action they're going to take is going to result in them violating this law and possibly getting arrested. So the safe thing to do, the best thing to do for their own self-interest is just not to go. That, I think, is the actual goal here, is to cause people to stay away from these things.
Okay.
And whether or not they will accomplish this goal, I don't know, but that's certainly, to me at least, and I think to a lot of other people, that is the goal, preventing people from going to protest for fear of getting unknowingly violating some federal law and getting arrested.
Okay, Mr. Hussein Gharbiye, you had something to comment on what Mr. Navid actually highlighted.
Well, what he said is totally, I agree with totally.
Yes.
But I would like to add something here. In democratic countries, there is a saying here, democracy protects itself. It takes time, but it will heal itself. In my opinion, this bill is illegal. It's against the Constitution. It's against the will of people, where democracy is built on the will of people. So democracy in the due course, it might take a long time, but it will heal itself through changing this bill, and goes back to just originality, to the real constitution where freedom of speech and will of people is respected.
Yes. Now, another controversial fact is in the law is the part where it spoke about the places of demonstrations. As the law spoke of restricted buildings or grounds. Do you believe that enough explanation is also made here, as in we go back to the same language as in speaking about these kind of policies and terminologies that are used that are not clear enough for normal citizens to actually understand? In your opinion, is there enough explanation that comes with that area? Many viewed it as extremely vague and broad terms, if we can say.
It is very vague. Only specified two places in this bill, the White House and the residence of the Vice President. But apart from that, they didn't say exactly where people are not allowed to demonstrate. They say where officials exist. Between brackets, officials. Officials. It means by officials the Secret Service people. So wherever they exist, demonstrations are not allowed.
Yes.
So where they go, you don't know as a citizen. You don't know that. So the only two places that's been clarified in this bill is the White House and the residence of the Vice President. The rest is left. Now the purpose is, as your guest said, I agree with him totally, is to throw fear into people, not to try or think even to say something or to demonstrate or to go to places if they know that you have secret people there, secret police there, or secret officials, in order to prevent people from saying what they want to say. What distinguishes America from the rest of the world is freedom of speech.
Yes.
Now, here, by throwing fear into people's mind and heart, people will stop going to demonstrations, to raise their voice, fearing arrest and jail.
Okay. Can we say that such amendments, Mr. Navid, can even cause anger among those who do not even want to demonstrate, but just for the fact that there are such amendments that will violate their rights, out of that they will have some kind of anger and fear and will go down to the streets and want to demonstrate? Is it provoking?
I hope so. I hope so. There's been a lot of, how can I put it? The U.S. since 9/11, at the very least, probably even before that, but since 9/11 certainly has been of two minds with regards to civil liberties.
Yes.
And I think the government has done a good job of instilling that kind of confusion in people, which is that civil liberties are fine when we're not at war, when we're in a state of emergency. But now we're dealing with emergencies, we're dealing with this, we're dealing with that, we're dealing with Boston bombings, we're dealing with such and such, and therefore civil liberties are sort of like a luxury that we may not necessarily be able to afford anymore. And instilling that thought in people to an extent has been successful. To what extent, I don't know. But those are the two competing narratives at play here, which is to what extent do we value our freedoms and our liberties, and to what extent are we willing to go to protect them? And the other is how much of those are we willing to give up for some false sense of security? So we'll see like which of those narratives prevails.
Okay,
I think it's too soon to tell right now.
Mr. Navid, unfortunately our time is up. Of course, we want to speak more about the things, that information that you have. But here, a final question, Mr. Navid. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, which the U.S. ratified, there are certain rights given to demonstrators. And also to say that the U.S. also signed and ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Okay, now, legally speaking, where does that keep the U.S., because they ratified such conventions, where would that keep them when they are keeping on changing or amending articles that served their own, what they ratified at the beginning, but now they are illegal in their own opinion?
You're asking me about the U.S. with relation to international law?
Yes.
Rome is above any international law. I can't, I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, the international law is fine for other countries. It is never applied when it comes to the U.S. How many war criminals have been indicted from the U.S., for example? Elliot Abrams, for one, should definitely be indicted for many of the things that he has done. Dick Cheney, why isn't he? I mean, I know I'm veering off the topic at hand, but international law does not apply equally across the board. We shouldn't pretend that it does.
Okay, Mr. Navid, Mr. Navid here, of course, a broadcaster with Voices of the 99% radio. Thank you for joining Cases.
Sure, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. Dear viewers, we will take a final break today's episode and be right back. Stay tuned.
Beyond the lines, beyond the surface. Depth, clarity, substance. Beyond the discourse.
Beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics.
Dear viewers, welcome back to Cases. The HR 347 will now more likely be used to criminalize future protests. The standard punishment under the restricted buildings and grounds law is a fine and up to 1 year in prison. More than 6,700 people have been arrested since protests erupted in the United States last September. Of course, Doctor, these are very important points that we're actually highlighting, and it gives us a better idea of what's actually going on in the United States. And here, a question that comes to mind, Doctor, where does that keep the United Nations, these violations that we actually highlight, and these kind of vague terminologies that are used in writing certain amendments when it comes to the freedom of right, where does that keep the United States from the criticism that it does have towards the Arab countries and towards the protests that are taking place in various countries that you previously criticized, let me say?
In this case, we have to be quite fair here. In time of crisis,
yes,
usually governments issue some unwanted laws. It's normal. Everywhere in the world they do. Governments issue regulations in order to fit the current situation they live in.
Yes.
If you have a crisis, you need to get some laws in order to manage to get out of this crisis. These measures taken by the government could be unwanted or unlikable by the people, but they still do issue these regulations, but usually for a short period of time, and they specify it. It should be specified, it should be clear. But in this case, in the US case, the period of time hasn't been set or told to people that we have only a number of years or
yes,
number of months. The places it's vague, it's broad. Everywhere could be a place where demonstrations are not allowed. This picture, in my opinion, makes or places the U.S. in a place where it is similar to the places or the countries in the third world countries.
yes,
There's no difference at all here because of the vagueness of this law, and in my opinion, this will turn the U.S. into a police state. Police state, usually, it's a term used to describe third world countries.
yes.
Now, the U.S. is described by a police state. Until when such circumstances last, we don't know. But as I said before, democracy will heal itself, but it takes time. But I'm sure it will heal itself.
Okay, Doctor, we are joined by Sarah Marusek, a political activist. Sarah, hello and welcome to Cases.
Thank you.
Sarah, in your opinion, what are the reasons for such amendments, especially the amendment made HR 347? Is it to actually counter Occupy Wall Street, and or because the United States is afraid of similar uprisings that took place in the Middle East to happen on the U.S. territories?
Yes, you are absolutely right. This is precisely what the government intends to do, is to prevent the American people from demanding their rights and demanding the freedoms that they require from their government. And I think that the timing is really important, obviously. But it's really quite tragic because the protests, for example, in New York City, Occupy Wall Street, really did suffer a lot from police brutality. And the police are not only coming to the protests and limiting where protesters can actually gather, who they can protest, but they're also actually preemptively arresting people before they even do anything. And the problem with this kind of law is that many of us are going to break it at some point because we don't know who is in the vicinity. They could basically say that, you know, the president's children are actually, you know, in the neighborhood and you don't know. And so when you then get later arrested for something, they could put this charge with you again. And basically they just stack the charges like that. They try you with like 60 counts of kind of criminal activity that is this kind of criminal activity, even though you've not really committed any crime.
Actually, the Republicans vowed when Obama decided to change or amend certain articles or the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, they vowed to actually stand in the face of such an action. But when it came to voting for HR 347, unfortunately, we got 388 to 3 votes. The 3 votes, of course, vetoed the resolution. Of course, these 3 are from the Republicans. Here, how do you view this kind of contradiction that is done by the Republicans? Of course, the Democrats voted all of them. But here, isn't there kind of a contradictive stances when it comes to the Republicans and vetoing, only 3 vetoing certain dangerous violation as HR 347?
Well, yes, I mean, because this law is so vague and introduces this concept of not only can you not demonstrate in certain places like White House grounds or near the Vice President's house, you also cannot demonstrate in front of people who are protected by the Secret Service. And so I think that this actually can be quite... many Republicans, if they originally thought that this was going to violate our civil liberties, and many of them are libertarians, they would then actually realize that, well, this is going to come in very convenient when we have a Republican convention, for example, or when we have a NATO meeting, which many Republicans support these, militarized organizations. So they'll see this as actually something that is good for them because it'll criminalize any kind of dissent about the policies that they want to put through, which are mostly regarding, militarized war campaigns against different countries in the Middle East, for example, or really anywhere around the world.
Of course, here, Sarah, as an observer to what's actually taking place on the ground, do you think that such an amendment will actually provoke more people to go to the streets, even people who do not want to demonstrate from the first place, but now are willing to demonstrate an amendment that does not give them their total right, and therefore the U.S. open doors that are totally closed in their faces? Do you believe that such an HR 347 open doors for more eruption or for more even violations, for even more anger from within the U.S. citizens?
I had a hard time hearing most of what you said, but I believe you were asking, is this going to encourage more protests?
Of course, would this encourage more protests in the U.S., as in making it provoking for most U.S. citizens that feel that this right does not give them their total rights?
I mean, I think it's going to be very difficult because the problem is that certain places are now going to be off limits. And we always ask activists here in the United States, because of our mainstream media, it's terrible. It's very hard for our voices to be heard by ordinary people. We have a very difficult time communicating our political agenda and actually protesting anything that happens, throughout our history, really. But now it's going to become even harder because they're going to push us to the margins. And, this is actually not just a strategy that the United States is using for internal dissent. It's also sending police advisors to countries like Bahrain to tell the government in Bahrain how to also not only silence the protests, but to move them outside of the city center. So you have this, basically this new way of restricting any tahrir from happening, whether it's in Bahrain or here in the United States. So if we're not able to, it's one thing coming together and protesting, and you feel good when you're in that kind of environment with the demonstrators. But if people aren't hearing about it, if people aren't able to see you, then really that kind of activism is not going to be effective to realize any political change.
Okay. Dr. Hussein here, do you think that people will be afraid to actually protest the way that they want to protest now? Because there is a certain kind of a price that they would pay. According to the amendment, they will go to 1 year of prison if violating the following article. Would that actually keep them back from demonstrating and making their voices heard?
Yes, definitely. It will hold them back. They will not go out freely as before to raise their voice, to say what they want to say. But in due course, they might demonstrate against this law in particular.
Exactly.
Not against other issues, but against this law. I can see it's going to happen, but not in near future. But people at this time, under such bill, they will be hesitant to go freely to demonstrations or to arrange for a demonstration or to join a demonstration.
The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, filed many federal lawsuits challenging restrictions on freedom of speech. Here are these kind of oppositions, if we can say, or challenging restrictions on freedom of speech, are they effective, that they are done by the ACLU?
This is the first wave of protesting against such bill, as I just said. It will increase the demonstration or the opposition to this kind of bill. It will increase slowly but surely. All kind of organizations, civil society, people, media, they will join in this protest, and eventually they will force the government, the U.S. administration, to review such bill in order to fit the real constitution. It's only a matter of time.
Yes. Sarah, of course, here a question also, as do you think that this bill actually banned certain people from saying what they want to say today in the United States? Do you think that there are more words to be said, more flags to be held, and more riots to be shown on cameras? But because of such an amendment, they stopped themselves from actually moving on with these kind of freedom of expression.
Again, I'm having a really time hearing what your question is. Can you just repeat it very quickly? Sorry.
Yes, I was speaking about these amendments and how, of course, certain kind of Americans would feel that because there are such amendments, and therefore they cannot express what they do want to express as always.
Oh, absolutely. This is limiting the freedom of speech in the U.S. And I think that, again, the worst thing about it is it's actually very targeted. It's not everyone who's going to be protesting against NATO, for example. It's only a certain kind of person with progressive politics, somebody who cares about social justice, someone who's against U.S. policy in the Middle East, for example, or in Asia or in Africa. And so this really criminalizes a certain kind of person, which is, the leftist, the activist. It doesn't necessarily, it's probably not going to apply, for example, as much to the Tea Party activists who also protest. Maybe now they cannot go to Washington, D.C. to do their protest, but they can actually protest in other places. So I think that, and actually I'd like to add that it's really interesting right now. There's a lot of anti-drone activity here in the United States.
Yes.
Where I went to my university at Syracuse in upstate New York, there are actually peace activists who have been trying to protest against the different drone facilities up in Syracuse. And they've been arrested, and some of them actually went to jail just for protesting against drones. Now it's become so ridiculous that actually there's been a restraining order put out against them. And so they're not even going to be able to come near to the airport where the drone facility is. And, that means that they're not going to be able to get on a plane and fly anywhere. So our rights are being restricted in really gross ways. And, the freedom of speech and the freedom of movement and the freedom to think of progressive politics have all been criminalized.
Okay, how will certain organizations, how will the American citizens, how will all these join together, criticize the U.S., or what do you expect to happen in the coming days with such an amendment that limits the rights? Now we're speaking about Middle Eastern societies that are protesting and how their own governments are actually practicing certain kind of oppression on them, and now we are saying the same words of United States, which is famous of the Democrats and famous of democracy, and even speaking on the behalf of democracy around the world. Sarah? I'm afraid we lost the line with Sarah Marusek. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us in cases. Of course, here, Doctor, I wanted to know about the position that this would keep the U.S. nowadays. What kind of position would it keep it in at times where it was the one criticizing the Middle Eastern society? And as I mentioned, it is the one speaking on the behalf of democracy nowadays.
Listen, when it comes to political system here in the for a particular country, the U.S. will have the excuse to say why we issued this law. We have everything democratic, but this law, because there's a need for it now. They will justify why they have this law. They attack other countries because the other countries, particularly those in the Middle East and third world countries, where everything is non-democratic. So they don't equal themselves with the people in the third world countries. But definitely what happened in the U.S. is a step back, not forward.
Yes.
It's a step towards the dictatorship, not democracy. They lost ground here. They cannot anymore claim that they are the democratic country where they want to spread democracy in the world.
And do you believe that that will open door for more demonstrations that we can actually witness in the United States? Or even more criticism from international communities towards such amendments?
Listen, basically, I don't care about the international demonstrations outside the United States. They will not change anything. What's going to change the situation is the American people themselves.
Okay. The choice that they will make.
Exactly. The choice, they have the right. They will change the law by persistence, perseverance, and next elections. This will be maybe part of their demands.
Yes, Dr. Hussein Gharbiye, Professor of Political Science at Lebanese University in Lebanon. Thank you for joining us in today's episode. Dear viewers, that's all the time that we have, and whenever those are persecuted, that place we tackle case by case. Thank you for watching today's episode.